जनता का आह्वान किया, वर्षों जकड़ी बेड़ियों को अब तो तोड़ो। क्रांति की मशाल जला गांधी बोले, अंग्रेजों भारत छोड़ो। बहुत सहा गुलामी को अब ना सहेंगे, आजादी की बात रही वो लेके रहेंगे। हम करेंगे, हम मिलके करेंगे, हम करके रहेंगे। हम करेंगे, हम मिलके करेंगे, हम करके रहेंगे। उसी अगस्त की बेला में हम सौगंध उठाते हैं, सशक्त राष्ट्र के सपने को चलो मिलकर आज सजाते हैं। हर युवा को रोजगार मिले, हर नारी की आजादी हो, हर घर स्वास्थ्य सबल बने, ये गली गली मुनादी हो। हम करेंगे, हम मिलके करेंगे, हम करके रहेंगे। हम करेंगे, हम मिलके करेंगे, हम करके रहेंगे।
As India progresses into the 21st century, Transform Rural India is passionate that no one should be left behind. There are 100,000 stranded villages in India where marginalized people don't have the same opportunities or chances to succeed as many of us do. We want to change that. But we recognize intergenerational poverty is a multi-headed challenge that can't be tackled with a single siloed focus. That's why TRI is a multi-dimensional solution design practice. We don't specialize in one area. We have a team of specialists, of practitioners, in all the vital areas of rural development. For instance, if a woman isn't eating healthy foods or given ample portions when she becomes pregnant, her child will be disadvantaged right from the start of life. That's why we focus not only on health and nutrition, but also on gender equality. If that child doesn't have teachers supported at school or a community interested in its children's education, never mind necessary infrastructure like functional toilets, that child will become disadvantaged. But an education is of little use if opportunities to build sustainable employment don't exist. That's why we build up capacities. But they're not only built up to create income, but also greater agency to voice concerns and help shape the future of their community. Of course, a changing landscape and climate will impact rural India more than others, so we help communities prepare. Our practitioners have created the thoughtful Colloquy, trifocal approach to development with 3 fundamental areas of practice. Knowing that most opportunities and services for rural Indians start with the government, our public policy and action and nudge units are embedded within government from central to state and, of course, local offices. They help develop the best processes to get villagers the services and support guaranteed to them in the Constitution. But no initiative begins without first asking the communities what they want and need. Then we design intersectional solutions and pilot programs based on those needs. And if they work, we scale up across more blocks and districts for true impact. But change isn't really sustainable unless enterprises are created and supported by supply chains and markets. Our primary work is with India's 100,000 stranded villages in Madhya Pradesh, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, and Uttar Pradesh. though we also create rural development solutions in Bihar, Assam, and Maharashtra. By designing Samaj, Sakar, and Bazaar solutions for rural development, TRI is building long-lasting bridges that will help bring equal opportunities to rural Indians, turning languishing localities into flourishing communities.
हम 47 को जब पहुंचेंगे, हम दुनिया की नंबर 1 और 2 इकोनॉमी में पहुंचेंगे साइज में। और दुनिया हमको कैसे दिखता है?
अगर हमने दुनिया को बढ़ाना है, दुनिया की समाज को बढ़ाना है, अपनी समाज को बढ़ाना है, नंबर को छोड़ दीजिए, लोगों की बातें सुनिए।
The pyramid of aspiration has become flat. Today, a 15-year-old son of a very rich person and a poor person's son in a very remote village have the same dream.
It is not as if rural India has to migrate and the share of urban population has to increase. It can well be the case that rural India gets well connected.
नगर निगम हमारा जब साफ हो सकता है, सुंदर दिख सकता है, तो गांव को ऐसा क्यों नहीं बनाया जा सकता?
जनता का आह्वान किया, वर्षों जकड़ी बेड़ियों को अब तो तोड़ो। क्रांति की मशाल जला गांधी बोले, अंग्रेजों भारत छोड़ो। बहुत सहा गुलामी को अब ना सहेंगे, आजादी की बात रही वो लेके रहेंगे। अगस्त की बेला में हम सौगंध उठाते हैं, सशक्त राष्ट्र के सपने को चलो मिलकर आज सजाते हैं। हर युवा को रोजगार मिले, हर नारी की आजादी हो, हर घर स्वास्थ्य सबल बने, ये गली गली मुनादी हो। हो, जन जन स्वाभिमानी हो। देश में ना रहे गरीबी, विकास ही अपनी निशानी हो। एक क्रांति फिर ऐसी हो, रगों में वही रवानी हो। कंधे से कंधा मिलाकर सब जनता का आह्वान किया, वर्षों जकड़ी बेड़ियों को अब तो तोड़ो। क्रांति की मशाल जला गांधी बोले, अंग्रेजों भारत छोड़ो। बहुत सहा गुलामी को अब ना सहेंगे, आजादी की बात रही वो लेके रहेंगे। अगस्त की बेला में हम सौगंध उठाते हैं, सशक्त राष्ट्र के सपने को चलो मिलकर आज सजाते हैं। हर युवा को रोजगार मिले, हर नारी की आजादी हो, हर घर स्वास्थ्य सबल बने, ये गली गली मुनादी हो।
हम 47 को जब पहुंचेंगे, हम दुनिया की नंबर 1 और 2 इकोनॉमी में पहुंचेंगे साइज में। और दुनिया हमको कैसे दिखता है?
अगर हमने दुनिया को बढ़ाना है, दुनिया की समाज को बढ़ाना है, अपनी समाज को बढ़ाना है, नंबर को छोड़ दीजिए, लोगों की बातें सुनिए।
The pyramid of aspiration has become flat. Today, a 15-year-old son of a very rich person and a poor person's son in a very remote village have the same dream.
It is not as if rural India has to migrate and the share of urban population has to increase. It can well be the case that rural India gets well connected.
नगर निगम हमारा जब साफ हो सकता है, सुंदर दिख सकता है, तो गांव को ऐसा क्यों नहीं बनाया जा सकता?
As India progresses into the 21st century, Transform Rural India is passionate that no one should be left behind. There are 100,000 stranded villages in India where marginalized people don't have the same opportunities or chances to succeed as many of us do. We want to change that. But we recognize intergenerational poverty is a multi-headed challenge that can't be tackled with a single siloed focus. That's why TRI is a multi-dimensional solution design practice. We don't specialize in one area. We have a team of specialists, of practitioners, in all the vital areas of rural development. For instance, if a woman isn't eating healthy foods or given ample portions when she becomes pregnant, her child will be disadvantaged right from the start of life. That's why we focus not only on health and nutrition, but also on gender equality. If that child doesn't have teachers supported at school or a community interested in its children's education, never mind necessary infrastructure like functional toilets, that child will become disadvantaged. But an education is of little use if opportunities to build sustainable employment don't exist. That's why we build up capacities. But they're not only built up to create income, but also greater agency to voice concerns and help shape the future of their community. Of course, a changing landscape and climate will impact rural India more than others, so we help communities prepare. Our practitioners have created the thoughtful Colloquy, trifocal approach to development with 3 fundamental areas of practice. Knowing that most opportunities and services for rural Indians start with the government, our public policy and action and nudge units are embedded within government from central to state and, of course, local offices. They help develop the best processes to get villagers the services and support guaranteed to them in the Constitution. But no initiative begins without first asking the communities what they want and need. Then we design intersectional solutions and pilot programs based on those needs. And if they work, we scale up across more blocks and districts for true impact. But change isn't really sustainable unless enterprises are created and supported by supply chains and markets. Our primary work is with India's 100,000 stranded villages in Madhya Pradesh, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, and Uttar Pradesh, though we also create rural development solutions in Bihar, Assam, and Maharashtra. By designing Samaj, Sakar, and Bazaar solutions for rural development, TRI is building long-lasting bridges that will help bring equal opportunities to rural Indians, turning languishing localities into flourishing communities. The India Rural Colloquy is coming up. But what is a colloquy? The India Rural Colloquy is not a conference. It's 8 days of conversations covering all aspects of rural development, with thought leaders in the social sector, joined by leaders in government, national, state, and local, as well as business leaders. The 4th Annual India Rural Colloquy, conversations about how to make India's rural renaissance a reality. Why August 1st through 8th? Find out in our next post.
जनता का आह्वान किया, वर्षों जकड़ी बेड़ियों को अब तो तोड़ो। क्रांति की मशाल जला गांधी बोले, अंग्रेजों भारत छोड़ो। बहुत सहा गुलामी को अब ना सहेंगे, आजादी की बात रही वो लेके रहेंगे। हम करेंगे, हम मिलके करेंगे, हम करके रहेंगे। हम करेंगे, हम मिलके करेंगे, हम करके रहेंगे। उसी अगस्त की बेला में हम सौगंध उठाते हैं, सशक्त राष्ट्र के सपने को चलो मिलकर आज सजाते हैं। हर युवा को रोजगार मिले, हर नारी की आजादी हो, हर घर स्वास्थ्य सबल बने, ये गली गली मुनादी हो। हम करेंगे, हम मिलके करेंगे, हम करके रहेंगे। हम करेंगे, हम मिलके करेंगे, हम करके रहेंगे।
As India progresses into the 21st century, Transform Rural India is passionate that no one should be left behind. There are 100,000 stranded villages in India where marginalized people don't have the same opportunities or chances to succeed as many of us do. We want to change that. But we recognize intergenerational poverty is a multi-headed challenge that can't be tackled with a single siloed focus. That's why TRI is a multi-dimensional solution design practice. We don't specialize in one area. We have a team of specialists, of practitioners, in all the vital areas of rural development. For instance, if a woman isn't eating healthy foods or given ample portions when she becomes pregnant, her child will be disadvantaged right from the start of life. That's why we focus not only on health and nutrition, but also on gender equality. If that child doesn't have teachers supported at school or a community interested in its children's education, never mind necessary infrastructure like functional toilets, that child will become disadvantaged. But an education is of little use if opportunities to build sustainable employment don't exist. That's why we build up capacities. But they're not only built up to create income, but also greater agency to voice concerns and help shape the future of their community. Of course, a changing landscape and climate will impact rural India more than others, so we help communities prepare. Our practitioners have created the thoughtful Colloquy, trifocal approach to development with 3 fundamental areas of practice. Knowing that most opportunities and services for rural Indians start with the government, our public policy and action and nudge units are embedded within government from central to state and, of course, local offices. They help develop the best processes to get villagers the services and support guaranteed to them in the Constitution. But no initiative begins without first asking the communities what they want and need. Then we design intersectional solutions and pilot programs based on those needs. And if they work, we scale up across more blocks and districts for true impact. But change isn't really sustainable unless enterprises are created and supported by supply chains and markets. Our primary work is with India's 100,000 stranded villages in Madhya Pradesh, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, and Uttar Pradesh. But we also create rural development solutions in Bihar, Assam, and Maharashtra. By designing Samaj, Sakar, and Bazaar solutions for rural development, TRI is building long-lasting bridges that will help bring equal opportunities to rural Indians, turning languishing localities into flourishing communities. Hello and welcome. I'll just give everybody a moment to take their seats. Good Thursday morning. Welcome to the finale of the 4th edition of the India Rural Colloquy. It is the most comprehensive gathering on rural India. And as many of you know, colloquy is Latin for colloquium, which is a very fancy way of saying conversation, because that's at the heart of this gathering. That's what we're doing. It's a unique gathering, and I use that word very deliberately because not only is it 8 days long, and you don't have too many conferences that are 8 days long. And it's not just because 1 or 2 or 3 days are not enough. It's because we take inspiration from the biggest people power movement in India and the world, August Kranti, a movement, a march for freedom. And we're taking inspiration for that because we are still wanting to see equal opportunities. We all know India is progressing, but what's at the heart of most people in this room, what keeps so many people here up at night is asking, is rural India part of that progress, part of the India growth story? The colloquy is also different because it's not just in Delhi, it's 5 states. So 8 days, 5 states. We had a Madhya Pradesh chapter, a Chhattisgarh chapter, Jharkhand, this year UP also added to the list, and of course, Delhi. And that's not all. We don't just have monologues from doyens of development or government in AC halls. No, because conversations are at the heart of the colloquy. That's what we're doing as well. We're having conversations and different events as well from many different people and many different stakeholders. Because we know that intergenerational poverty is a multi-headed monster. It's no good just chopping one of those heads off because another one will come right up. So we believe in a multi-dimensional approach to rural development. And with that, that means we want a myriad of voices. We want to hear not just from the all-important government voices that actually help and dole out so many of the services to rural people, but we want to hear from rural people themselves. And we want to hear also from, of course, civil society organizations who are at the sharp end of rural development, but also from business. And again, that's at the heart of TRI, the Sakar Samaj Bazaar approach to development. We've already had talks on climate, on resilience, on livelihoods, diversification of the workforce. We even launched the State of Rural Youth Employment Report, which you might have seen in one of the many newspapers of India that took the story up because it had some interesting and surprising findings. And we are also having many discussions about governance and how we can use governance to improve the democracy and the voice of local people as well. I would like to now invite my colleague, Neeraj Ahuja, the Associate Director of TRI, to come and give us a little bit more about the IRC, about the India Rural Colloquy, and the ethos behind this event, and to set us off for the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Lindy. So good morning, everyone, distinguished guests, delegates, and passionate change makers. We all have different role today here and throughout the journey of colloquy from 1 to 8. But how I would like to see, and I often emphasize, is partners. So we are all partners in this quest to achieve a flourishing rural India where every dream finds its space to grow and every effort is recognized and rewarded. So today, as we gather here for the India Rural Colloquy finale, we are not just concluding a conference or a talk show. We are here to celebrate a movement a movement dedicated to transforming the heart and soul of India, that is our rural communities. You heard about Colloquy, and the idea of Indian Rural Colloquy was born out of a vision to bridge the gap between potential and prosperity. It was designed to be a collective endeavor to bring to forefront the challenges, the innovations, and the spirits of rural India, and to forge a partnership and to forge pathways that just not just improve the lives in our rural communities, but also transform the rural areas, making them a thriving place, a place where communities have abundance, opportunities, and growth. And that's why we chose August 1 to 8th to celebrate this momentous occasion, because we all know August Kranti was one of the largest mobilization in our country, which led us and accelerated the quest for independence, which challenged the status quo and excited everyone for a new beginning. And that's what we believe is required today to ignite a rural renaissance in our country. We in India today are standing at an inflection point, and we have a dichotomy of a growing India and a stranded India. And that's why we believe there is a requirement of a concerted effort of all the stakeholders. That's why I like to address everyone here as partners. All the partners are required to transcend this languishing localities into flourishing localities. And that's why if you see at IRC, the discussions transcended traditional boundaries. It was having a conversations and a complex interplay between environment and sustainability, economic growth, social justice, and institution building. This intersectionality underscores the nuanced challenges that we have, and also the opportunities that lie today, and that requires and demands a holistic and integrated approach, a multidisciplinary approach to cater to the unique challenges and to unlock the immense potential we have in rural India. So as we move forward, I would request all of you to let's hold on to the conversations that we have materialized through the IRC, the connections that we have forged, and also the commitments that we have made in transforming these languishing localities and also catch up to the growing India. So with this, I want to express my heartfelt gratitude to each one of you for bringing your passion, your ideas, and your belief in a better tomorrow for our rural brethren, for our rural communities. So thank you once again for not just being participant throughout this journey, but also pillars of this grand vision of rural renaissance, for which we firmly believe the time has come and our people and our country will rise up to that occasion. So with this, I would start the day today. We have in the culmination today an interesting lineup of sessions for you. Lindy already briefed you about it. We will listen to a lot of people about the key ideas and insights and innovations and opportunities that lie in front of us. So without further ado, I will start our first session, which is very appropriately titled Rural Futures, Ours to Make. This session will explore contrasting yet complementary approaches of market-driven and inclusive for all development. The session will have conversations and lay out the blueprint for a flourishing India. We have distinguished panelists today with us, distinguished speakers with wide experience and rich experience that will examine the strengths and challenges of each of these approaches and aim to find a balanced strategy that fosters equitable and effective rural development. So with us, we have two of our esteemed conversationalists today. I would like to invite Mr. Vijay Mahajan and Ms. Irina Vittal to please join us on the dais. A big round of applause, please. Mr. Vijay Mahajan, Secretary and CEO of the Rajiv Gandhi Foundation, is a renowned rural development professional, a social entrepreneur, and a policy analyst. He has founded many pivoting organizations like Pradhan, and he is also part of several of the defining institutions in our country, like the Insurance Regulatory and Development Authority of India, Rangarajan Committee on Financial Inclusion, and Raghuram Rajan Committee on Financial Sector Reforms. He also is a prolific author with over 20 papers in prestigious journals and contributions to 15 academic books. And his expertise spans across rural development, microfinance, and social innovations. So I would also like to invite Mr. Vijay Mahajan to take this conversation forward. But with that, we have Ms. Irina Vittal, who will be leading the conversations. Ms. Vittal is one of India's most renowned advisors with over 16 years of experience as partner at the prestigious McKinsey & Co., where she helped global companies achieve growth, sustainability, and profitability. With deep expertise in developed and emerging markets, she assists businesses in crafting dynamic growth strategies and effective local leadership. Irina has also co-authored several books on rural development and has worked with government bodies on including rural development. So I am privileged to invite both of you, and thank you very much. A big round of applause again as we start the conversations. Over to Irina.
Thank you so much.
There are some people
Online.
virtual audience. Yes. Okay. For which platform? Zoom and live stream. Okay, great. From all our offices. Yeah, so I'll keep that in mind because often one can ignore the virtual audience.
So I was invited to be the DJ today. Okay, and what I thought we could do is I could just frame the questions because you are the one with the answers, and then we can open it up for questions from the audience, both in the room and outside. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Well, I would prefer if we have a conversation and involve the audience as well, but as whatever.
So let me just frame the questions on my mind that we can explore a bit. So I'm one generation removed from a village because my mother grew up in a village, but I always grew up in a city. And I've spent a lot of time in the corporate world. I've spent a lot of time looking at urbanization. And the thing that I find most fascinating about rural is the lens through which it is often described, not necessarily by people in this room, but by a whole bunch of literature or the lens through which you look at rural, which is one of problems or one of poverty. When actually one generation removed, you look at 900 million people or 700 million, depending on the census in rural India. And the question that strikes you is this conversation about poverty or is it about productivity? Is this conversation about subsidy or is it about technology? Is this conversation about welfare or is it about investment? And therefore, the question that I wanted to explore with you today, Mr. Mahajan, was how should one be thinking about the economic model for rural India? How should one be thinking about the political mindset towards rural India? And how should one be thinking about the social narrative about rural India? Because the old approach or the often used approach of poverty, subsidy, welfare kind of misses the point that we are sitting on one of the most valuable resources in the world, which is young people. Huge amounts of lovely land in an ecosystem that gets a lot of water, doesn't keep much of it, but still gets a lot of it. And an ecosystem which only has an upside potential going forward. And rural is huge, but let me just give you the three snapshots to make this come alive for you guys who are the experts of this. First one to me is the farmer. So 50% of GDP is rural, but 15% of GDP is agri, right? So these guys are 1/3 of India's GDP. And amongst the best businessmen that you could find anywhere in the country. They live with unprecedented risks. Their risks have only gone up because of climate change. I mean, this was a community that first saw the hit of climate change back in 2013-14 and continues to live without that. They produce food for us. And remember, in the 60s, we didn't have this. And if they ever put their tools down, there wouldn't be enough grain in the world. There wouldn't be enough port systems in the world. There wouldn't be enough shipping. And we wouldn't have a fiscal deficit to manage if these guys were not performing what they were. And in addition to the new risks that they have, they also have a challenge of talent. Their kids don't want to join farming. It's a non-aspirational business. They don't have enough people to be able to help them with farming. And yet you look at the whole FPO approach, where you look at the whole cooperative approach for 35%, which is now at livestock. And the thing that strikes you is the conversation perhaps has to be about the mindset of building a business, the business of agriculture, rather than the politics of cheap food. So how do you think about the business of agriculture? How do you think about infusing investment into this sector in a manner that they can take the transition risk? Because even an Amul required a certain amount of support in the initial years. And how do you think about a balance sheet which initially does not require repayment in the same way as you think about a regular startup? And how do you think about capability and capacity to be able to build a value chain which starts in Moga and ends in Delhi, or it starts in Pune and it ends in Bombay? Because these are also global value chains. Global value chains are not just between America and China and India. It's also between a dairy farm and an urban market, right? So one question for me is, when and how do we, from a political point of view and from an economic point of view, think about the business of the Indian farmer and think about getting investment there, getting technology there, and most importantly, bringing capabilities if you want FPOs to flourish, if you want cooperatives to flourish. Because these farmers, these great businessmen have extracted as much as they could have on the back of intention, aspiration, and effort. But now the new risks that they have will perhaps not be able to fulfill their aspiration if they continue to grow the old way. And the large farmer, by the way, is not the villain. I mean, out of the 120, 130 million farmers, if you have 30, 40 million large farmers, they are part of the solution. So how do we think about a mindset which includes them as part of the solution and does not make this only about small farmers or subscale farmers? Because the small will not grow without the connection to the market, and that will need scale. So question number one is the economics of agriculture versus the politics of cheap food, and how do we make that transition? I'd love to understand that point of view. The second one is the enterprises. We have millions and millions of small enterprises. A lot of them construct, a lot of them do metal and fabrication, a lot of them build roads and houses, a lot of them do trading, a lot of them do transportation. And they have the same problems that the MSME has in all of India, which is the small remains a dwarf. It doesn't grow large. And a lot of it is similar to the farmer's problem, which is they're not able to bring technology. They're not able to connect with scale. They're not able to get the investment that goes beyond working capital to new, and they're not able to get capability. So as you think about the 700 million or the 900 million people who will continue to live in rural India, even post-migration, how do we think about an economic model for the small enterprise to become large? And how do you connect them to large companies, which become the anchor tenants? How do you get a whole bunch of small people to platform and become large collectively? How do you bring technology to them? And how do you do all of this in a manner that connects them to the value chains that you really need and helps them manage risk? And I'd love to understand how you think about it, while even as we come to the third big pillar of rural India, which is the youth. I mean, TRI did some fascinating baselining work in one particular district, and we found there were 350,000 young people there. About 140,000 were in employment, right, out of the 350,000. So you had a labor force participation rate there of about 40%. Out of this 140,000, 70,000 were self-employed, 35,000 were casual, and 13,000 were in salaried jobs. 7,000 were not employed. And when TRI did the baselining, they found that every year that particular geography of India could only produce 11,000 jobs. So you have 350,000 people, more adding up every year, current unemployment of 7,000, new jobs of 11,000, huge amounts of casual work, 50% of which was in rural, in agri, on farm, and a disproportionate large number of small enterprises, which were usually enterprises with one person. Now, this is not a model, and creating one more FPO or creating one more job here or there is not going to solve the scale of this issue. And yet you have communities where water is not being taken care of, soil is getting degraded, greens are not being developed. Yet we have communities in the same area where basic education is not being solved for. The old people are living unheeded. The young people are being served by amazing people who are paid 7,000 rupees casual and are doing the work of God, but we don't define that as work. And we have villages which are okay, but which don't have stormwater drains, which are not thinking about services to the citizens, because they are active citizens of this country in the way that the state should. So our definition of jobs does not reflect the needs of the community, right? We don't see taking care of a poor person, taking care of, I mean, we have 150 million old people. It's the second largest community of old people in the whole world. We don't define going to their homes and taking care of them as a job. We don't define, we have coaching classes which are a job, but basic education is not a job, right? So I wonder, for the youth population, how should we as a nation be thinking about what is defined as work? What is defined as a job? How do we create social aspiration for these young people to not hanker for a job in a city or to do IT or to do manufacturing, all of which is good, but is not going to be enough to meet the needs? How do we make it okay for quality construction job to be a good job, to be valued in the job market? How do we make it okay that we have pride in the mason, which makes sure that our big, new buildings do not leak after 1 year? How do we make it okay for people to work in retail? You talk to my retail friends and they have 40-60% attrition because nobody wants to work in retail. So how do we define jobs differently? How do we create social aspirations for jobs differently? And then how do we build the skilling mix to be in a manner where these people's aspirations, social as well as economic, can be met? So the fascinating thing for me is not the problems of rural India, right? It is that we know the farmer has to become part of a collective. The real issue is, how do you bring that collective to life through finance, through capabilities, through investment, through technology. The issue is not that the small enterprise is a dwarf enterprise. It is how do you bring him the value of scale while recognizing that the ownership will remain small? How do you use platforms? How do you use special policies to make that viable and connect them to value chains? The problem is not that we have too many youth and they're unemployed. The issue is how do we define jobs in a manner, and then how do we make it socially acceptable for them to want to work in waters, in solving water issues and taking care of our greens, taking care of our stormwater drains, providing services to fellow citizens and community, and doing construction well. And how do you do it in a manner that the policy supports this, not from a lens of vote bank or of poverty, but from the lens of agency and empowerment, that we socially and from a community point of view redefine what good living means and what taking care of each other means. And the economic models create space for small enterprises to be able to handle the risk of growing up and connecting them to the market. And to me, it's in the how of reimagining these elements that the solution lies, rather than, saying that rural is different, because it is different. It's never going to have the agglomeration benefits of a city. It's never going to attract global investment. But there is a huge domestic market. And there is enough agency in rural India to be able to meet the social aspirations and the economic aspirations, even as migration continues at the pace at which it will. So let me pause here, and Mr. Mahajan, you have thought of this in such an amazing way. How should we be thinking about this differently, and what are your thoughts on this?
So, sorry. Yeah. First of all, hello, virtual audience. Usually you tend to be forgotten. So wherever you are in the ether, hi. And of course, hello, physical audience. You mentioned leaking buildings. It seems to have become a common phenomenon. But leaking question papers is even more now a feature of our life. So when you were speaking, I was saying, oh God, the questions have fortunately been leaked. And thank God, I wrote the answers in advance. So let me use this opportunity to do a bit of self-promotion of this paper, a new strategy to address India's triad of employment crises. The new is in caps because it's an acronym. We'll talk about it. But since it is August Kranti Saptah, तो ये ग्रामीण भारतीय संवाद में आप सबका अभिनंदन. और the question is, or the slogan is, quit India. But for our contemporary times, quit India and do what? So in the 70s, particularly for those of us who were in the IITs, quit India and go to America. One, right? Or quit India conceptually, but become Hindustan leaver, right? So the third option was to quit India and go to Bharat. And I think that option underlies a number of points that Irina made. That interestingly, a lot of our crises and a lot of the solutions to that crisis are right there in rural India, which, it's become a fashion to call it Bharat. Although my definition of Bharat is really on the basis of not geography, but demography. So there's a lot of Bharat in urban India, and there is some India in rural. If you go to, there are now hundreds and thousands of well-off communities in rural India. So, so let me start with something you pointed out, Irina, and I just want to re-emphasize. And two things you didn't mention, but I'm sure it's in your consciousness. We are actually incredibly well endowed in terms of natural resources. We have roughly 120 million hectares of net zone area. more than 160 million, maybe 170 million gross cropped area. We the remaining 150 million of the hectares of the land mass is not all just useless. 70, 80 million of that is forests of various kinds. Even what is called wasteland and so on is not bad. And, the Himalayan slopes or the other mountain slopes, some of which are, getting very badly affected, they're all ecologically extremely important resources. Secondly, we have roughly, plus minus 900 to 1100 millimeter of rainfall on an average. We have, most of Indian districts have about 75 to 100 rainy days a year, apart from the peak 45, 50 in the monsoon. So reasonably well distributed rain. You said that the water flows out, but that can be fixed, that can be fixed. Two things you didn't mention. One is we have some of the highest solar radiation falling on our landmass, 250 days of solar radiation, so matlab done, 300, some places 340, and then we have some of the world's greatest repository of biodiversity, and I'm forget Arunachal and Western Ghats of Kerala, which are of course like global champs in biodiversity comparable to the Amazon rainforest, but the rest of India also is not bad. And so you combine these, the Jal Jangal Zameen, the solar and the biodiversity, and we can be the global food producers, So no big deal. I often talk about 3 photo ops for India. Photo opportunities, but these are not photo only in the click sense. First photo is photosynthesis, using the combination of biodiversity and solar and the monsoon and the soil. We can produce virtually any species of, which grows photosynthetically in some part of the India or the other, And if we get systematic about it, and there is already a 10-year-old project called NICRA, National Initiative for Climate Resilient Agriculture. But, it's generally not, not much in practice, but we could respond to climate resilience in such a way that we actually use it to our advantage, because, many things which are being produced elsewhere will not be produced, and many things which we are producing, we may not need to produce, and just as well. Rice, wheat, sugarcane, cotton, 4 things that we produce, are actually overproduced and are causing, human epidemics of various kinds and stuff. So, so we can use this as an opportunity. So that's photosynthesis. The second is photovoltaic, of which I'm delighted to say that India has made significant breakthroughs. We are now getting to be one of the world's largest solar energy producers, and we'll get even better, particularly as green hydrogen is now beginning to be linked with solar power generation, because you need a lot of power to electrolyze water, and then downstream you get extremely clean fuel. And the third photo is indeed photogenic. Rural India is so beautiful, and when your colleague Ahuja, Neeraj was talking about the schedule, I just quickly looked at my Google Calendar and counted where I was from the first to today. And I'm glad to report that I've been in 5 states and have used train, bus, plane, and lots of Innova, and have been to villages during this, week of Gramin Bharatiya Samvad, and of course have had many dialogues. It's all about Samvad. So it's so I feel qualified to respond to respond. No. In the current account, I don't believe in resumes. Those are for your obituary. But if I'm here, it needs to be justified in the current account. So indeed, I was sitting in a rural setting with a group of women, uh, focusing on how they are using digital payments technology. And that's when, because I was looking at the phone, I got the news that Professor Yunus was asked to be the chief advisor to the government. Since then, of course, I think he's now become the prime minister, or will. Okay, great. So I thought it was so poignant. I was sitting in the group of women. I immediately took a picture and sent it to his secretariat. कि भाई आपका काम चल रहा है, आप देश चला लो. So anyway, so but many of the points you made, Irina. First of all, I'm delighted that they're coming from you, because you already started by saying you're one generation removed from rural India. But in terms of your professional career and so on, in some ways, people can ask, you don't have a locus standi to advise about rural India. This is the kind of cheap mentality that we suffer from in India, that, unless you fulfill some subjective criteria, aap uski baat bhi mat karo. So the fact is, those who are insiders are often trapped in their past worldview, which has brought us to the problems where we are. And therefore, the questions and the nature of solutions that you're suggesting are extremely important. For example, you emphasized the two major sources of not yet locked up wealth. One is natural resources, and the other is the youth, the demographic. And the second thing is, you mentioned the need for entrepreneurship as a major driver. And the third is to focus, to, in a sense, revalue what traditional economics values. For example, we have this massive contradiction that on the one hand, India is supposed to have very low female labor participation rate. On the other hand, if you look at the National Sample Survey on household time disposition, which came out in 2023, which looks at what a person does for every 15 minutes, except between midnight and 4 a.m. And if you look at women of India working all the time, they work 45% more than men. And to say that female labor force participation rate is low is like, sort of completely being blind to the total existential contribution of the Indian female. The problem is not with what they're doing. The problem is with the way the economy got configured, where production is valued, exchange is valued, reproduction and sharing, reproductive activities and sharing and caring is not valued. So that's a problem with mainstream economics and everything else that got built with that. And we need a paradigm shift there, and some of that will have to come from our intellectuals. Some of that will have to come from our political leaders, and some of them will have to come from ultimately the capital markets. And I don't think the capital markets are evil or demons. And at least in two sectors, they've made dramatic improvements in our own lifetime. One is we've seen in India. If 40 years ago I told you, roads can be built by the private sector. Sitting in, of course, this hall didn't exist 40 years ago, but the other India International Hall, if one said this, you'd be run out of the room for being a rabid capitalist. Okay? Now, almost all roads of India are built with private capital, including the so-called NHAI. Okay? Most of it is actually, parceled out to private sector. So in the infrastructure sector of India, as you know, from virtually zero private capital participation to now nearly 80-90% private capital participation, though some of it sanitized through the public-private partnership route. We have seen that the capital markets have stepped up once institutional frameworks were created to assure them that there's a reasonable chance of a decent rate of return and being the investment being returned. So in the microfinance sector, I myself helped in building that sector. And in 1996, when I set up Basics, after being in Pradhan, when I set up Basics as a for-profit microfinance entity, people used to tell me, "Tumhara dimag kharab hai kya? You think you will borrow from banks in wholesale, lend to the poor, and they will repay you and you will return to the banks? Don't be crazy." In those days, I used to work in Bihar. So I got very nervous. So I did 50% student concession. And I said, "Okay, okay, yaar, chalo, let me start this in South India, which is more decent place." North India repayment rates were 30%. South India was 60-70%. So udhar chalte hai. So that's why Basics, though I never had worked in south of, the Tungabhadra, Basics was started in Raichur district, on the banks of the Tungabhadra. So, so basically, we need capital markets also to respond. The other field where the capital markets are beginning to respond is environment. A lot of climate finance, although it's still, the transition has to be made. But I'm dying for a day when people from Wall Street or Dalal Street will say, "Arey boss, water harvesting structure banao na yaar, 23% IRR hai, minimum. कई जगह तो 44% है, बनाओ ना, हम डालते पैसा, कितना 1000 करोड़ चाहिए, डालते." But obviously it can't be done if we say, "नहीं भाई साहब, ये पैसा थोड़ा CSR में डाल दो, थोड़ा पंचायत को दे दो, थोड़ा लीकेज में जाएगा, and if you put 1000 crores, you might get about 28 crores back." Obviously capital markets will run the other side. So we have to do the same hard work of institutional reform as we've done in this country already in the infrastructure sector, in the power sector, although it's still some place to go, in the telecom sector, in the the roads and airport sector. We've done it. In microfinance sector, when I started first year Basics, we did 1.7 crore disbursements, and we were the country's largest microfinance institution, the only one, right? Commercial. Last 31st March, the total microfinance in the country was 3,40,000 crores, 3.4 trillion crores in just 28 years. And it's the capital markets, the regulators, of course, the players, everybody the whole ecosystem came. So I want that to happen to two things. One is India's natural resources, and the other is India's human resources. If we can make the capital markets and the ecosystem and the political economy behind that see that we are missing on the two greatest investment opportunities in the world, and they're right under our nose. And I'm happy, by the way, to give up on everything and just come with you and whoever else is more credible to the Bombay stock market or any mover and shaker. अब अडानी साहब बोले वो रिटायर होने वाले हैं 8 साल में, तो उनको बोलो ना, अगला 8 साल साहब नेचुरल रिसोर्सेज में 10,000 करोड़ डाल दो, छोटा है आपके लिए, और ह्यूमन रिसोर्सेज में 10,000 करोड़ डाल दो, and do it as an investment. Okay. Adani Effective Education Limited, Adani Natural Resource Limited, kar do bhaiya. And show to us that, you are really a Deshbhakt, and baki sab maaf ho jayega. Bombay airport free de dega. So I'll stop here.
There's one call to action. And so I completely agree with you that it has to be an investment-led approach.
Yes.
It has to be at scale. And you need a whole bunch of reforms across political policies, economic players, as well as mechanisms of working to be able to manage this risk. Where do you think one would start?
Yeah. Mike, only.
Where do you think one should start? Like you started with basics in Raichur, right? Where do you think this journey starts?
So actually, this journey has to start at the universities. Because I mean, this is one of the fourth or fifth such paper I wrote. The initial invitation was from Ella Ben while she was still alive. She invited me to write a paper on alternate economics, and I, given my penchant for acronyms, I called it BEN, B-E-N, Building an Economy of Nurturance, you know. So this is in some way the fourth or fifth version of that. But basically, I've come to the conclusion that the three crises that we are facing in the world, the social crisis, which shows up in various ways, all the way from high rates of depression and suicides to divorce rates to mutual intolerance to all the hatred and violence-driven politics that's got expressed. It's all being built from social angst. The second is the economic crisis, where we have simultaneously 5,000 crore weddings and, you know, crores of people barely able to earn 5,000 rupees a month, you know. And then the environmental crisis, which actually is such a mega crisis that we could all evaporate while we are having this discussion in about 5 years' time. If you were in Delhi just, 6 weeks ago, even the air conditioning was, giving up. So I've thought deeply about these three crises, and actually these are symptoms. The real crisis is an epistemological crisis. Epistemological meaning, what do we call valid knowledge? And though I'm, myself an engineer, I love science and technology. I wanted to be a physicist. So I'm not at all anti-science or anti-technology. But starting somewhere in the 17th century, we elevated, empiricism and the scientific way of thinking to such a high level that slowly displaced every other way of thinking. Slowly, that which was not explainable by science was called non-scientific, then unscientific, and then slowly irrational, and then mumbo jumbo. Okay, to the point where and then technology, which is the baby of science, started producing such fantastic goodies for us. Of which my favorite example is, of course, the cell phone. Being an electronics engineer, I kind of know what the hell, all the stuff that's gone into this. The physics behind it, the engineering behind it, the precision engineering behind these chips, I mean, to do 5 nanometer chips, what does it take? So I am, on the one hand, love that. On the other hand, human experience has remained what it was. Not all of our experience is amenable to rationality or sensory perception. And therefore, anything which is emotion or aesthetic or spiritual, we have forgotten how to deal with it. But that experience is still there. So we're not able to deal with it. Because भाई वो rational नहीं है, don't be emotional, be rational. So अरे भाई emotional तो है ना, क्या करेगा? So we don't process that, and therefore we go berserk. So we need to restore a new epistemology which says, hey, science, please, do you mind stepping aside? Go and stand in that corner. That's where you belong. There's aesthetics there, there's emotion here, there's spiritualism here, maybe there's something else here. So we need to restore, and that job has to be done by our top intellectuals, philosophers by a university. I really want to take issue with our top universities in the world for having sold their soul to the capitalist world. You know, they become consulting companies, you know, and that's not what universities were elevated to by society. So it can't start in Raichur, it has to start in universities. But secondly, it has to start or be accelerated by the tech types and by the capital types. You know, तो अपना IIT, IIM का यार दोस्त सब, they need to get their act together and recognize that in 5 years we'll evaporate, or in 10 years, at least the next generation could be seriously socially, in a bad place. And this is the time to invest all your smarts, the tech smarts and the capital market smarts, to address these problems of how do we use this unused wealth of natural resources and human resources to do that. The third thing that we have to fix, हमारा आंखों के सामने इंडिया में बहुत सारा सेक्टर ड्रामेटिकली अपग्रेड हुआ है. टेलीकॉम देख लो. When I used to work in Bihar in a village, I had to take a motorcycle 30 kilometers, go to Gaya post office, GPO, book a trunk call to my wife who was in Delhi, sometimes wait for a whole day, call नहीं आता था. अभी उसी गांव से मैं I can make an international call from my mobile phone. अपना आंख के सामने हुआ है. Same thing in banking transactions. Same thing in so many other sectors, infrastructure, etc. But it's not happened in these two critical sectors. Our education sector, in front of my eyes, from the time I used to go to the Hoshangabad science teaching program in the 1970s, when middle schools were still pretty good, it is now even the so-called Kendriya Vidyalayas, which have been renamed by the PM Shri Kendriya Vidyalaya, their standards are down. As a nation, the nation's elites, as the nation's thinking leaders, we have failed the next generation by not fixing our education system. We need to fix it. But even that, we can do it in 10 years. But unless we fix our environmental system, we'll evaporate. And I am therefore using this opportunity to all the tech smarts and all the capital market smarts to please work on the political system and ensure that it is forced to address these two challenges.
So in some ways, we need another booklet, because imagine if you had a booklet which says India's known GDP is 3.3 trillion.
Yes.
But we also have another 10 trillion in our human resource and in our natural resource. And that's lying unexploited because we don't see it.
Yeah.
Right? And then you need new economics.
Yes.
So Raghuram Rajan's fourth pillar needs to get converted into third pillar, right? Needs to get converted into the new economics of valuing this. And that needs to get converted into what the capital market sees as an opportunity with manageable risk, and what the government sees as budget line items that need to be invested behind, and therefore what the country sees as jobs to be focused on, right? So Anish, Anirban, that's your new article that you guys have to write with Vijay's help. What is the real GDP of this country?
Yeah.
What is the new economic?
I had a quantitative annexure, but I suppressed it because,
So he's done it.
No, I mean, I would actually want this paper not to be a paper, but a wiki. So first draft, and then let 1,000 people
build on it.
We'll work on it.
Yeah. But I think the underlying point, and I'm going to open it up now to you guys, the underlying point is, unless we reimagine, it's like, forget who said, right, that discovery lies not in finding new lands, it's in finding new eyes. Unless we change the way we define rural or India, actually, this is a story of India. It's not a question of story of rural India. Unless we see different things, we will continue to play the marginal game of optimizing today, which is not a win-win game, right? We're never going to really win today's game. We have to create a new game. And that comes from redefining What is it that we are fighting for? Why is it worth it? How will it make economic sense, social sense, and political sense? And what's the implication of the journey as we go towards a different orbit? Because it is a different scale. It is a very different context of climate change as well as human resource, as well as the opportunity. And yet, in a new world, we're playing, in a T20 world, we're playing test cricket, right? And we have to change the game itself. So thank you so much. And you still have Vijay for some more time. What questions do folks in this room have? What questions do people online have that you'd like him to answer?
Hi, online, I hope you're still there.
Do you get the feeling he prefers online? Yeah.
Well, I'm into numbers. I hope there are at least 100 out there.
You mentioned about the role that private or corporates need to play in this, and it's an investment and not a CSR. So how do you look at the whole ESG narrative which is emerging, and can that show some pathway to the corporates or contribute in this?
John Elkington, the person who came up with the triple bottom line reporting idea 25 years ago, and ESG is to some extent based on that. A few years ago, wrote to the Harvard Business Review, who had published his original article, and said he wants to do a retraction article. And the HBR editors were, a bit surprised, saying, they've never had a request by someone, and the article was very well received, so why retract? And he said he'd written the triple bottom line article to change the way business thinks of its purpose. But he finds that it's really become a new optic, So CSR, ESG, all these three-letter words, tend to, the problem is the optics, which is why I'm saying, boss, CSR ka baat mat karo, let's go straight to capital markets. Now, talking of that, there is a study, I think by JP Morgan or one of these, which says that those companies in the NYSE, which were ESG toppers, also have had a much steadier ROE for the last 10 years. So there is some evidence now gathering that if you do the right thing, you also get good returns. But basically what I'm saying is it'll have to be a discussion about how this is going to improve the return on investment.
Yeah. I totally agree with Vijay, right? I think it has become a checklist and it has become mechanical. While actually, I think two things need to happen. One is it has to be part of core growth strategy. It is not the annexure to the appendix, which allows the CEO in the 5th year to make a little bit more money, because that is already unwinding. Europe, which was the most switched on ESG, you can already see how the noise around ESG is getting muted. Wherever the CEO's long-term investment plan is linked to ESG, you'll see some dynamics. But the reality is the way it is being defined today, the consumer doesn't pay a premium. And anybody who's following ESG guidelines sensibly is seeing himself become more uncompetitive. I think the point that Vijay has made is it has to be core to growth. And then it will be in the boardroom where it matters, because it's central to the growth of the company. But the other thing, I would also say to you that I think a whole bunch of companies are not yet born. The companies who will build businesses in this new space do not exist, because they will come with a different focus, with a different intentionality. And the underlying point is that it's not about good intentions. It's not about inclusion. It's about return. This is going to require technology. It's going to require investment. It's going to require capability. It's going to require focus. Until we see this as a market, as a viable market, We are always going to tinker around the edges and make this about welfare and subsidy and the poor person, which is never going to be viable. You can't have 700 million people or 900 million people getting redeemed because one is taking pity on them. This is not a pity party. This is an investment thesis, right? Now, which companies will see value in effectively using people from India, for Japan, as the rest of the world is shrinking? Those companies are going to get born. And there are noises today about people movement, for example, being a political issue of migration rather than an economic issue of talent. Those companies are being born. The marketplaces do not exist. Similarly, water is going to create billion-dollar companies. Soil rejuvenation is going to create billion-dollar companies. Handling commons in a sensible way, which is margin accretive, is going to create billion-dollar companies. So this is about new companies being born.
Hi. I have the next question. Based on your experience, I just want to understand your experience on the field and your interactions with different stakeholders and functional partners. So there are two statements. I'll make two statements. One is rural is poor, or rural is rural area, but not poor. You know, the policies, the initiatives. So what do you think? What is your understanding on these two statements? And what do you think the other stakeholders and the functional partners think about it? Thank you.
No, so if you don't take just a narrow geographic view of the term rural, then at least about 25% of rural India is sitting in urban India. You know, what you call the migrant worker population has very strong linkages, you know, coming and going, certainly monthly remittances, and all kind of stuff. So, you know, first of all, I think it's time we cut this dichotomy. It's a totality enclosed by a geography, and there are now massive interlinkages. There's web connectivity, there is rail and road connectivity, and there is, thanks to large number of migrant workers, there's transactional and economic connectivity. So we have to build on this, and rather than think of this as a dichotomy, ke Gramin alag hai or Shahri alag hai, you know, we need to, in fact, the smart city is such a dumb idea. I mean, take the capital city of India, right? It's seriously dependent on Haryana for water. 2 दिन में हमारा पानी बंद कर देते. It's seriously dependent on Rajasthan for milk. वो 2 दिन में हमारा दूध बंद कर देते. Seriously dependent on UP for vegetables, and seriously dependent on its air from Punjab. If they burn parali, we can't breathe. So what a smart city. Huh? So instead of this, what I'm saying is we should talk about Samarth Zilas. Samarth means capable districts. Capable of doing what? Capable of providing sufficient, decent livelihoods to their population, their natural population, and giving them a reasonable quality of life. Just these two things one wants from our districts. And it can be done district by district. I did a Samarth Zilla plan for Bastar district 5 years ago, because I used to sit on Chhattisgarh State Planning Commission. So it is possible if we think of it as a rural-urban continuum, and there are a lot of synergies. You know, we can do that. So it's time we did away with this dichotomy.
Yeah, from a facts point of view, 3 thoughts for you. One is based on the last census, 45% of India's richest people lived in rural India. Second, the definition of rural India itself is worth contemplating. Because if you take census towns, which are urban but still rural, because they don't want municipal taxes, then rural India is not 65% of India. Rural India is perhaps 40% of India. So what is rural itself is a definition issue. And the third thought is that we are a fascinating country. One of the reasons our food is so cheap is because none of the farmers have a balance sheet, and therefore land is not priced. The moment you price land
And the moment you price the natural resources that the farmer has, especially taking into account the income tax provision of this country, the definition of who is rich and who is poor will change. And you see this actually amongst the poorest of the people. There is nothing worse than an urban poor. Rural poverty is not as bad as urban poverty, right? Because urban poverty kills and rural poverty doesn't. So even the definition of what is rich is very vague in a country where land is not priced in any farmer's balance sheet, even whether it's half acre, 1 acre, 20 acres. So rural India is not poverty-stricken Mrinal Sen movie anymore, right? I don't think it ever was. And so I don't know where you're going with that question, but this is not a dichotomy of rich, urban, and poor Indian.
How do you feel about the rural? Because you've been on the field, but there are a lot of people who think rural India is poor India, you know, and rural India, and then there are other agencies who think, or the policies that have been made.
No, I
What
think
is the center thing?
my sense is that
Whatever comes from the government is based on because the rural is a poor area or a poor.
yeah. Okay, we have a couple more minutes. Any last questions? Vijay's favorite online audience. Do you have any questions?
Yeah,
You do. Excellent.
Thank God. Show your presence, man.
So yes, there are 4-5 questions, so we pick the back to 2 questions.
Okay.
Wonderful.
Why don't you?
Tell us.
So first question, what could be the models? Basically, what you suggested that how the stock markets and they should also be talking about the natural resources. That what could be models basically to harvest natural resources by using equity markets? So that's the one question. And the second question is basically on the various campaigns which are run by governments, agriculture and Har Nal, but also seeing the other side of it that people are leaving their own natural resources, natural assets that they have in the villages. So how to address this gap which is widening in the country? And there is one more question which I think you can.
One at a time.
Okay, okay. Let's. So first one maybe.
First one.
The models of
Yeah.
market utilization for the natural resource harvest.
Yeah, so in some ways, I already gave two examples. First of the infrastructure sector and the second of the microfinance sector, where from being complete zero capital market participation to high capital market participation, that transformation happened. And the trick is in creating the correct institutional framework, both legal, regulatory, as well as organizational frameworks and the ecosystem, the supportive ecosystem. The government actually needs to be less of a player, direct player, and more of a rule maker and rule enforcer, and let the players, let the best of them prevail and so forth. So I think it can be done, but you use the word harvest. So one of the things we have to be very careful is that natural resources need to be harvested sustainably. So it can't be rapacious profit maximizing in the short run harvesting. So it's got to be something which aims at a 10-year kind of time frame and thereafter steady almost annuity incomes, But Pahla 8 saal, coincidentally, same period as when Adani ji is retiring. 8 saal, we need to invest 2% of our GDP in natural resources. It'll be done. I've got detailed Excel spreadsheets. I'm willing to put it up in the public domain. 2% of India's GDP for the next 8 years, and we are done. We have only 2.4 million water bodies in India, boss. 24 lakh. They all need between 2 to 10 lakh rupees. Trivial amounts to make them into, Pradhan, I sort of roam around. One farm pond, which costs measly 2.5 to 3 lakh rupees, becomes a hub of both livelihoods and social life. the farm ponds are made for protective irrigation, but उसमें fishery भी हो जाता है, उसमें उसके बगल में थोड़ा vegetable cultivation भी हो जाता है, वहीं पे the women come and do their bathing and clothes washing. That side, some buffaloes are drinking water and having fun. I mean, it just one little 1/10 of an acre water body changes life. And we won't invest in this. Why? Why won't capital markets invest in this? There's a 33% IRR. Why won't they invest in it? Because there's no institutional framework. Right? Right now you want to give it as a grant from Sarkar. But supposing there was something called Panchayat bonds. Right? Panchayats raise money from the capital markets. We do have municipal bonds. Even those are few and far between. Only 2-3 municipalities that raise money. But in the rest of the world, all cities raise money through municipal bonds for their capital projects. So we can have panchayat bonds. Let them be government guaranteed for the first 10-20 years. Okay? A day should come when somebody will say, "Arey yaar, Tapukada ka panchayat ka mein invest karo, boss. Kya kaam karte?"
Yeah, because you have mentioned Adani quite a few times. I should
Even.
No. So, so 1 year back, when he said that about 6,000 odd crores he will put into his birthday, and we actually came up with the idea of agrivoltaic farming, and Dr. Ashok Gulati, and actually put it in a op-ed piece in Financial Express and Indian Express.
Okay.
And he called him.
Achha.
So morning it is out. Evening and 8 p.m. they had a 1 hour conversation. How do we build this? And lo behold, we created a vehicle also for this, and we called it Farm Watt. This is January. They sent a team here, CFO and 2 of their leading people to look at this. And Mr. Gulati had Dr. Gulati a project in KVK outskirts of Delhi, Najafgarh, where he was experimenting this. We spent a whole day, created a structure. After that, so all this was done, 100 CR committed. 2 days after, Hindenburg hit, and everything came quiet. So actually, he was interested. So while you put it, so he may be interested in these ideas where their IRR we were looking at 28% or we have built everything. So as you are saying, so now the thought is coming, we could look at soil, water, and all these spaces, and there would be some with some institutional and innovation, there could be spaces for capital market to play.
Soil, water, but also care.
Yeah.
Education, old people, Anganwadi, all of this should be a business.
Yeah. So actually, acronym I follow in the footsteps of Vijay. So we have this teach economy, travel, entertainment, cuisine, care, arts, heritage. This is the economy that is going to flourish in rural in some ways when we look at, and in some ways we are building that conversation around it.
Don't make it romantic.
Romantic.
Don't make it romantic,
Okay.
right? Because romantic is not always monetizable. Make it about services. Right?
Yes.
These are citizen services.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. Shall we wrap up?
There was one more question. So it was specific to the education point that you raised, Vijay sir. So basically, you cited that after 1970s, there is a drop in the standard of the education and the quality of the education. But what do you think the critical reasons behind it? Why we failed as a collectively as a nation to actually address education, improving the education system in India?
Well, it's a mystery to me because, why it is a nation which built IITs in the 1950s couldn't focus on its primary education, and in fact, it's only declined since then. Jokingly, one explanation is that our first education minister, the great Maulana Azad, who was a very wise, learned man, he never went to school. He just went straight into higher education, So he built IITs, but anyway, schools was state subject and somehow it got ignored. But it was a purana baat, yaar. There's no point blaming it to them. Politicians will do what wider society wants them to do, all said and done. If nothing else, 2024 has proved that. So it seems wider society had a consensus that we need a large number of epsilon semi-morons, to use Aldous Huxley's phrase from Brave New World. You know, and it suited our caste system also very well. So we need a large number of hands who can do menial work in the old style economy. So wo chal raha hai, chalne do. It's now becoming a crisis because, you know, the high enrollment, school enrollment rate, and particularly for girls, has unleashed a large number of so-called educated unemployed. And that's becoming a political issue. You know, so now it's got to be sorted out, you know. So I want to end by saying that the one sector that we all together need to plunge into, and I'm not saying kal ko election mein khade ho jao, but the nation's politics is too serious a matter to be left to politicians. It's time we citizens started looking at it. लोक नीति को राजनीति के ऊपर अंकुश लगाना ही पड़ेगा, नहीं तो we are all these problems can't be solved in seminar rooms. They have to be solved in the streets, and we need the politicians to deliver on that.
Thank you, sir.
Can't get better than that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was so great because it wasn't only informative and insightful, but it was peppered with jokes and laughter. So you can't ask really for a better session than that. Thank you so much. I really liked how you were talking about the sessions of the companies yet to be born that could look after things like environment and education, and perhaps the idea for an institutional framework, maybe even society bonds.